Compression is one of those audio effects that everyone learns about at the very beginning of their music production journey, and for good reason. Dynamic range compression plays a major role in shaping our sound, giving it more cohesion, more sustained energy, or to use a more technical term, more oomph. And because it's one of those basic tools that I've been working with for a while, I thought I understood pretty well how it works, but as it turns out, I was wrong. Specifically, I was wrong about these two guys here, attack and release. From various sources on the internet, as well as the descriptions offered within Ableton Live, I learned that attack is how long it takes for compression to fully engage after the signal crosses the threshold, and release is how long it takes for compression to fully disengage after the signal goes back below the threshold. These are very simple, intuitive explanations of how attack and release work. Unfortunately, they're so simple that they're literally straight up wrong. Let me show you why. Suppose we have an input signal that toggles between -6 and 0 dB. Let's set a ratio of infinity to 1, which means that parts of the signal exceeding the threshold are compressed all the way to the threshold. Let us do an attack of 40 milliseconds, a release of 80 milliseconds, and a threshold of -3 dB. For simplicity, all of the following experiments, including this one, will be done with the compressor in peak mode, meaning it responds to the peaks of the signal, a hard knee, meaning we go from no compression below the threshold to full compression as soon as we exceed the threshold, and a look ahead of 0 milliseconds, meaning the compressor responds to the signal in real time instead of looking ahead and reacting to parts of the signal that have not yet occurred. Okay, so let's see what the output signal looks like after compression. This is exactly what I would expect. When the input signal exceeds the threshold, the attack is engaged and compression occurs. When the input signal goes below the threshold, the release is engaged and compression ends. But what if we set a threshold of -8 dB, so the input signal never goes below the threshold? Based on my previous understanding of attack and release, I would expect the output signal to look something like this. The input signal immediately exceeds the threshold, attack is engaged and compression occurs, the output signal is brought down to the threshold, and since it never crosses the threshold again, it remains there forever. But as you may have guessed, this is not what happens. What actually happens is this. Attack and release are engaged every time there is a change in the input signal. At first I thought, okay, maybe this could be because the output signal goes below the threshold. However, the same phenomenon is observed when we adjust the threshold and ratio settings so that neither the input nor output go below the threshold. This made me think, huh? The reason why this happens is not complicated, but it requires a slight shift in perspective. Attack and release do not occur whenever there is a threshold crossing. They occur whenever there is a change in gain reduction. Different parts of the signal require different amounts of gain reduction. With our threshold of -12 dB and ratio of 1.5, the parts of our input at -6 dB require 2 dB of gain reduction. The parts of our input at 0 dB require 4 dB of gain reduction. Let's see how the gain reduction changes over time as our input signal progresses. Let's play that a little slower now. As expected, the amount of gain reduction oscillates between 4 and 2 dB. Importantly, you can see that attack is engaged whenever there is an increase in gain reduction from 2 to 4 dB, and release is engaged whenever there is a decrease in gain reduction from 4 to 2 dB, regardless of whether the input signal crosses the threshold. Thus, attack and release should not be viewed as only functioning occasionally when a threshold crossing occurs, because they are continuously at work whenever there is compression being applied to the signal. This perspective makes it much easier to see how these parameters affect the smoothness of compression. Now suppose we have an input signal that goes between -12, -6, and 0 dB. Setting a threshold of -18 dB, where the entire input signal is above the threshold, we indeed see that attack is engaged whenever the signal increases in amplitude, thus requiring more gain reduction, and release is engaged whenever the signal decreases in amplitude, thus requiring less gain reduction. If we set our threshold to -8 dB, the output signal looks similar, with attack and release occurring whenever the signal changes. Even though our -12 dB part of the input is below the threshold and thus requires no gain reduction, release is engaged because the previous part of the input signal at -6 dB does require gain reduction, so there is a change in gain reduction here that necessitates the release curve. If we set our threshold to -3 dB, now we see that neither attack nor release are engaged when the signal is at -12 dB. This is because there is now no difference in the required gain reduction between the -6 and -12 dB parts of the signal. They are both below the threshold and thus require 0 dB gain reduction. But what happens if the attack or release time is longer than the time it takes for the input signal to change, as is the case in most practical musical applications? If the attack time is longer than the time it takes the input signal to change, the compressor does not get to apply as much gain reduction as it wanted to before the signal increases again. This ultimately results in the output signal having higher peaks. If the release time is longer than the time it takes the input signal to change, the compressor does not get to ease off the gain reduction as much as it wanted to before the signal decreases again, which ultimately results in the signal dipping lower. If both the attack and release time are longer than the time it takes the input signal to change, then both attack and release are not able to affect gain reduction as quickly, resulting in more subtle, smoother compression. Practically, what this means is that increasing the attack time results in higher amplitude peaks, increasing the release time results in the signal dropping lower, and increasing both results in a more subtle, smooth compression. If we overlay these three outputs on top of one another, we can see that adjusting the attack and release times does have a pretty substantial effect on the output signal. So yeah, I was wrong about compression. Attack and release are not activated solely when the signal crosses the threshold, rather they are frequently engaged, booked, and busy, shaping the compression that is applied to the signal. And now, I understand compression a little bit better. Anyway, that's all I have. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you already knew this about attack and release, it was probably just review for you, but I hope that you at least liked the visuals and they helped provide a little bit more perspective on how compression actually works. If you enjoy these kinds of audio experiments, please consider liking and subscribing. There are many more experiments to come. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time in the laboratory.